and we will start with Hebron Street. The other deferred item was St John's and that area. So if I could ask the officer to do an introduction on Hebron Street.
Do you want to do the other things?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we've got other things on the agenda which I failed to mention. It's returning rustiness, this, John. Election of Vice Chair. Could I move Councillor Davis? Right, thank you. Apologies for absence. We've got Barbara Brownridge. Yeah. Anybody else?
Councillors Hewitt and Malik, Chair.
Thank you. Have we got any urgent business? Sorry? No, we can't do it. No, been informed. Yeah. Declarations of interest. Yes.
Just for item 7, please, Chair. I've got a prejudicial interest. I'm related to the landowner.
Right. Those will be registered. Any other declarations of interest? No? Okay. Have we got any public questions? No public questions. Right. Minutes of the previous meeting. If somebody would be kind enough to move them. Is that seconded?
Yeah.
We all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right. We're straight away now starting the planning applications. So if we could go back to the Hebron Street, and I was just going to ask the officers to introduce this to find out what progress has been made on the issues that it was deferred for from the last meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully, quite a lot of progress has been made to the last meeting, and hopefully we've now got a solution to the concerns that were raised. Members will be aware this application for 77 houses. Previous application was refused for a number of reasons, and those reasons were then subject to further information being submitted to the council. Okay. To overcome those, and at the last meeting most of the discussion was focused solely on the issue of access to the site, and in particular 2 elements to that. One, as to whether there was an alternative access position to coming down Hebron Street for the actual development site itself, so that's excluding the construction traffic, which would be limited, and a temporary road would be put through the adjacent industrial estate for that. And the second was to do with whether, if that was the case, the junction of Hebron Street onto Oldham Road could be improved to a satisfactory degree. Members will see from the report, and I'm aware that they've also received some correspondence direct on this particular issue about the reasoning why an alternative access wouldn't be acceptable. This is the site, obviously just on the green area there, Hebron Street coming up towards the Oldham Road junction. Other than going through the industrial estate, and again it's obviously the new residential development, it's not really appropriate for the finished development to access through there. The only other alternative would be from Bulcoat Lane to the north of the site. But there are a number of problems with that, and they're set out in the details in the report. It also needs perhaps to be mentioned that the configuration of Bulcoat Lane would probably be unsuitable for this particular development. What we've got are the site itself and the development site, so Hebron Street coming in at this point. Now this is a superseded layout because one, if you like, side issue or important issue at the last meeting was also to do with car parking provision and how we could relieve some of the issues on the existing stretch of Hebron Street itself. So this was the original layout on this particular scheme, and obviously it would be difficult to see on at this stage, but there are an additional 6 car parking spaces alongside the carriageway, and they've been provided adjacent to the public open space. So obviously if there is a little bit of congestion on Hebron Street, there are other facilities both in these parking spaces and in fact on the carriageway itself to deal with that particular issue. This is just a picture of Bulcote Lane, really, just to indicate that given the other restraints in terms of finance, land ownership and so forth, that again, as an access to the site, as you can see, there are no footways along much of the stretch, so to serve a large residential development wouldn't really be an appropriate alternative. So we're left then with access off Hebron Street itself, and this is the proposed scheme for improvements to that junction. Again, probably difficult to see in detail, but what we effectively have is that the carriageway itself would be widened by virtue of a new pedestrian island at this point. So that serves two purposes. One, obviously, it allows pedestrians to get across the road more safely, and secondly, it provides protection for right-turning vehicles going into the site. Now, there obviously still is a potential that, particularly if more than one vehicle is waiting to turn, it will slow down traffic and block temporarily while that vehicle goes round, because there wouldn't be the space for those two vehicles to pass. As a result, obviously any vehicles coming round the corner, they'll need pre-warning of that, and a new scheme of signage would be put in place to warn them there. And also, of course, by putting these restrictions on, anybody who is tempted to drive at speed through there, it acts as an obstacle, if you like, to that, and would serve also to slow traffic down on that approach. Again, similarly, it gives an option that if vehicles were emerging from the site and turning right, similarly it gives them that ability that vehicles would stop the through-flow traffic to allow it. I think if there are any comments members have, I'm sure Wendy will give more details on this, but there was some comment at the last meeting about accidents in the local area, but there's no evidence that any accidents actually at this junction at the moment, and it's not anticipated that, given the increase in traffic that would result from the additional houses, that would change that particular scenario. Again, this is just a picture. Members saw some of the pictures last time, so this is the area that we narrowed down. Approximately at this point here, you'd get the pedestrian crossing coming through on the site. So as I say, all the other issues were discussed at the meeting on the last occasion. This was the outstanding issue that members deferred a decision for. There is the information obviously in your pack, both in the main report and in the supplementary late list, demonstrates that. As I say, I'm sure we can answer some queries if members still have those on those issues. The other thing to draw attention to is that in your main report, obviously it suggests that this is for a decision today, if you like. The actual resolution as set out on the late list would be to grant permission subject to those conditions, and also subject to the applicant entering into a legal agreement to provide £15,000, which will be the contribution towards the works at the entrance to the site. There's also, you'll see on the late list, some amendments to conditions. As I mentioned at the beginning, there was some discussion on the last occasion about construction traffic. So what we've done, there were two conditions, we've tightened those up and put those together as one, just to make clear that what we're talking about in construction traffic is not just HGVs. This is all the workers' vehicles and so on. So there has to be a restriction on the site to prevent them, and also to prevent, for instance, workers deciding they're going to park on Hebron Street and getting into the site. We want to make sure that there is no opportunity of them doing that without having to walk a long way round afterwards. So subject to those changes on those conditions, subject to the resolution to grant, it is now recommended that members approve the application. Thank you, Chair.
Could I just mention that both in debate and in voting, it is restricted to members that attended the last meeting and discussed it there. So that is, yeah, you can have a setback. So have we got any questions or observations? Yeah, Clinton.
The construction traffic is going to be going through the Moss Lane industrial estate. Has the developer got permission, not just from the landowner, but from all the separate businesses that they're going through that area with vehicles and wagons and this, that and the other?
I don't have the precise answer to that, but at the end of the day, they will not need the approval of, I would expect, not need the approval of the other businesses along there, only of the landowner themselves. And the landowner, of course, has got an interest in making sure they don't upset the people who are paying their rents and so on there. So I'm sure they'll put in provision to ensure it doesn't cause disturbance to existing businesses.
Has anybody else got any comments? Yes, Councillor Glaston.
I'm not sure I misheard, but did you say the road will be widened to accommodate that pedestrian crossing?
It won't be widened. It won't be widened to accommodate the crossing. The crossing can be accommodated in the existing carriageway.
Anybody else at all? Yes, Councillor.
Hello. So if it's, sorry, just in further detail about that crossing, I'm just wondering, does that mean then that it is now wide enough in sort of, have you looked at it again and seen that it is wide enough for a car to be turning right and a car to go past? Is that what's different in terms of last time, Rob? Or?
The pedestrian crossing will be narrower than a right turn pocket. The pedestrian crossing, but all this will be properly designed by the highways team, and we are confident that it will allow the junction to operate safely. The pedestrian crossing, so you're slowing down to turn right into Hebron Street. The pedestrian crossing is a physical measure, and then you'll be stopping to turn right, and so anything behind you will have the crossing that's warning of it's a physical measure that you potentially slowing down for, and then you see in the car that's waiting to turn right as well.
Anybody else got any contributions?
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Would somebody like to move, make a proposal? It has to be somebody that was at the last meeting.
I'll move objection. Thank you.
Sorry,
I'm just not convinced by this highway. You said that there's
you're going to move. You're going to move refusal.
I'm going to move refusal.
Yeah, you said objection. That's what.
Sorry. I know a girl that died on that tree. She ran into the tree. So there have been fatalities there, and I don't honestly think that highways are putting enough provision in to safeguard children walking to school, pedestrians and vehicles turning right. I travel that road, I can't tell you how many times a week, and it's horrendous now. And I think that must be one of the biggest black spots in the borough, to be quite fair. And I just don't think there's enough going into this. A right turn, it could be accommodated. There's council-owned land to the left-hand side of that road as you're coming into Shaw. The road could be widened. I know it would be costly, but what you're saying is that the cost of one person's life is not worth that, so I'm sorry.
If I could just ring the highway officer.
So I'd like to answer two things there. If we widened the road and we'd have a right turn pocket where a car could wait, the rest of the traffic is going quicker because it doesn't have to slow down for the right turning vehicle. So that wouldn't necessarily, having a right turn pocket wouldn't make it safer. I've actually just increased the things that I need to say to 3 things. The provision of the pedestrian crossing, if we're talking about children not being able to walk to school safely, that would allow them to cross more safely if they chose to cross there. And then there have been accidents at the Perth Street and Hebron Street junction in the last 5 years, so I really don't want that to go on record that there haven't been. There have. We've got the records. One was serious and one was slight.
Okay, it's been moved that this is refused. Is that seconded at all?
She doesn't give any reasons.
Sorry.
She doesn't give any reasons.
And the reasons that you're giving for refusal, could you actually outline them, Councillor Gloucester?
I'm just not convinced by the highway interventions in it. I really am not, especially not with the other developments that are on this site. That building there is going to be, I think it's 9 apartments, and there's another scheme that's been approved. So I just don't think enough thought has gone into it. And you're talking about, it's not only a few houses, it's 77 houses, which is probably a minimum of 140 people, adding a few kids. And you're into far too many. It's just too big a development without appropriate access. And I honestly don't believe that you can't get access off Bulcourt Lane. I'd love to see a photograph of the actual scheme itself in relation with the road, with Bulcourt Lane on it, because I've received a photograph today.
We are actually dealing what's in front of us, not what.
Well, that's fine, but you can't show us the actual site itself in relation to the access points around it. And I'm sorry, Bulcourt Lane might not have pedestrian ways on it. However, that doesn't mean that cars can't use it. I'm not talking about for pedestrians. We're talking about vehicles and safety on that blind bend.
So your objection going forward, if it is refused, would be on traffic and the danger that the development caused. Well, we have obviously officers have to have reasons for the refusal of the application.
I'm sure the officers can come up with one.
Can I bring Mr. Hannaby in?
Can I just perhaps go back over the highway improvements that we've been describing to you? Perhaps that'll help. We have taken this very seriously. It has been looked at again. We looked at the possibility of getting a right turning lane in. And you obviously know the road well, and you know that as you come out of Hebron Street, the road to the left-hand side is a little wider, and then it narrows as it gets to the Hebron Street junction. And because of that, and because of the drop in levels on the other side of the pavement, and the fact that all the services run through the pavement, there isn't enough room to get a right turning lane in, even if we wanted one in. The difficulty we've got as well is that we can't, from a highway safety point of view, we can't justify having a right turning lane. And what you've got there is, if you can see the pedestrian island there in the middle, that will enable pedestrians to cross more safely than they do at the moment. There's a refuge halfway across. So that will help in terms of the pedestrian safety issues that you've been discussing. They've got a footpath that runs all the way through the site, all the way to the junction, a pedestrian crossing point, and then back onto a footpath. In terms of cars coming towards Hebron Street from the Hayside direction, from the left-hand side, where that road is wider, they will come round the bend and they will see the pedestrian refuge in the middle of the road. That helps to create a visual and actual narrowing of the street, so it will encourage cars to slow down at that point. And if you're turning right, you would go past that refuge and you would pull over to the right hand side. And so your car, if you like, if for anything coming behind, there would be the refuge in the way. So that creates a much safer environment in which to turn right. Yes, there's going to be cars queuing because that's what happens where there's right turning junctions. But that facility, plus the advanced signing at either end that's going to be put in, will help to create that a much more safer access than it is at the moment. And to the point where we cannot, as officers, support an objection on highway safety. So that's where we're at. There isn't a possibility of an alternative access. There isn't a possibility of any further improvements. and what we have in highway safety terms is something that's acceptable.
We still need a seconder for the refusal or an alternative proposal. Councillor Actor.
Chair, in terms of the highway sort of improvements that have been suggested to us today, and the concerns that we had at the last meeting as well, and obviously I think if we widen the road and put a right turn in there, I think it won't, the safety element of it won't be increased. It'll probably get worse. The cars will probably go at a higher speed, and I've got reservations in terms of the congestion it will cause on Hebron Street and etc. But I think the actual development outweighs those concerns. Therefore, I'm going to recommend approval.
Yes, Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can I second that? And I think I'd also like to say this proves what planning committees are all about here now, because there was concerns raised about this last time, and now they've been looked at, and the scheme is now a better scheme. Councillor Bashford spoke on it very well, and there's a limit to what you can do and what you can't do, and I think, you know, they've come up now with more suggestions, and they've made it with new signage, with a crossing. It's a far better, it's going to be far better now with you know, with the input of the planning.
Is my understanding correct that I arrived 3 minutes late, therefore I can't vote?
You weren't here at the start, Shane, you can't.
Okay, so I arrived 3 minutes late, apologies.
I could have more sympathy with these objections if they'd have listened to the previous one on Shawbank Road in Greenfield, which is a lot worse. And a week after you went ahead, we had a car that overturned, and it's a lot worse than this. So I tend to agree with your Vice Chairman that I think they have looked at this, the officers, and I think they've taken into consideration the concerns, and I'm pleased they have done that. I'm not so sure that means that we need to shout hallelujah, because I'm not so sure that they've taken the concerns to the limits that we were expecting. I think people will expect that road to be widened, whatever we say, because I think that's just the way of the world. And with respect to the highways officer, there's no way you're going to stop those cars from speeding up and shooting past, because that's, I've been down to Broadway today, on Middleton Road and Broadway. They do it every day, and if you slow down to let them turn, somebody behind you pips you and puts their foot down and shoots past, and that's going to happen here. So I'm not happy with it at all. I agree with the Vice Chairman that concerns have been looked at, but I'm not so sure that we've got the right answers.
Right, has anybody else got any comments? It's been moved and seconded approval. Could I have all those in favour of approval, please? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. Those against? 3 against. So the application is approved. Sorry. Sorry, was there any abstentions? Yes. Yeah. Okay then, thanks very much indeed. We're now moving on to item 10, which is the St John Street development. Again, it was deferred from the last meeting, and the same rules that we've just gone through still apply. and this was deferred, I think, on 2 issues, and I think we've got some answers on those issues.
Which item number are we on there?
What I did say is item 10, St John Street. And like I've just said, that it was deferred, I think, on 2 major issues that members wanted some clarity on. So if I could pass over to the officers to outline what progress has been made on those.
Thank you, Chair. This is an urban regeneration scheme on brownfield land, part of the wider regeneration of North Werneth for 68 houses, including 38 affordable dwellings administered by First Choice Homes. Since the last committee, officers have been held negotiations with the developers, and I have visited the secretary of a local residents association at her home. So the reasons for the deferral were 2 in relation to public open space and the desire to locate affordable housing throughout the site. The site is split into 2. It's phases 3 and 4 of the wider scheme, phases 1 and 2 having already been built. Right. So we have a revised layout for phase 3, and this really relates mainly to the public open space. Following negotiations with developers, we've managed to get units 9 and 10, I believe, which are here, were originally here, relocated along here, along the frontage of St John Street. And that puts the public open space more or less back into the same shape that it was before, but more importantly increases the separation distances between the development and the houses on Vernal Way, Vernal Gardens, so that the minimum distance now is 23.3 metres, as opposed to much less. And one additional benefit that we hadn't been asked to do, but this unit here, unit 13, has moved forward, so that minimises the impact upon the neighbouring dwelling here further. Even though we considered it acceptable in the first place, it's now even better. So this is an aerial view. Sorry, I'm going back the wrong way. This is the other site for the layout for phase 4. Now, the affordable housing is all located within phase 4. We had asked the developers if it would be possible to pepper pot throughout the site. However, the affordable housing is being funded and financed by a grant of just over £1.4 million from Homes England, and there is a cut-off date for that money to be spent of March 2021. So if the houses were pepper potted throughout the site, if the affordable houses were pepper potted throughout the site, they would be provided at the same speed as the rest of the site is built out. There wouldn't be control to ensure that the houses were all built in time. And if the funding was lost, the scheme wouldn't be viable anymore. The essential point now is that the house types are the same. That when you're walking down the street, it's tenant blind. You couldn't tell the difference between an affordable house and a house on the open market. So there it's set out. Homes England allocated a £1,404,000 grant towards the cost of 36 affordable homes. It needs to be provided before March 2021, and having all the homes on one site is essential to meet this deadline. But if you look at the whole of North Werneth as a whole and the regeneration as a whole, affordable houses are dispersed throughout North Werneth. So it's not as if there is one enclave of affordable housing in the area. There isn't. They're spread out. These are the two street scenes, and this is to demonstrate my earlier point that it's tenure blind and you can't tell the difference. This is a street scene from phase 3 and relates down here, and this is a street scene from phase 4, which is along there, and you see the house types are identical. It doesn't look, one area wouldn't look less affluent than another area, one area wouldn't be blighted in comparison with another area. It's a high quality development across the whole of the two phases. It just so happens that the tenants in phase 4 would be there, have landlords as first choice homes, and it would be affordable housing, but it would be built with the grant from Homes England, and it would be built on time to take advantage of that grant, and that grant wouldn't be lost. So we've increased the layout of the public open space by moving the houses. They've got slightly smaller gardens. So as a result, the area of open space is now 280 square metres larger than previously approved. And then another important point is the maintenance of this open space will be paid for by new residents. No existing residents will be required to contribute. So this is an overlay comparing the new public open space with the previous open space. The previous open space is in blue, and you can see the new public open space is in green. There is a slight alteration between the two, but the new proposal is more space, and it's more or less the same. Essentially, most importantly, the separation distance between the houses on Vernal Gardens and the proposal is acceptable now. It's 23.3 metres. So in conclusion, we've got 53% affordable housing as this scheme. It's part of the wider regeneration of North Werneth. All the affordable housing, as I said, is located within phase 4, but that's to make sure that the funding, which only goes up to March 2021, isn't lost. And the houses are all tenure blind. There's increase in separation distances to the houses on Vernal Gardens, and the public open space is now greater than approved. So for that reason, we recommend this application is approved.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation. This is one application I think the planning department have taken on board what was discussed last time, and I'm very pleased with it, and I think this is ideally what we need to be providing: low cost homes and public open space. And I think he's done his best, and I will move the recommendation.
Councillor Acton.
Chair, I'll second that, but I'm glad that the developers have come back with a revised scheme and taken on board the concerns that we actually raised at the last meeting. I've still got issues around the social housing being sort of put together all the same place. I know it's tenure blind, etc. to start off with, but over the years we'll be able to tell which ones are to let and which ones aren't. But however, that's not a reason for refusal, so therefore I'm happy to recommend approval. Well, second is a recommendation.
Is there any other comments? No. It's been moved and seconded approval. All those in favour? Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Okay, we now go back to the agenda as printed. And the first application is King Street. I don't know whether we've got anybody to contribute. Mr. Barnes, is it? I'm sure you're aware, Mr. Barnes, but you have 3 minutes to do your presentation. Thank you.
Do I switch it on? Please. Seems a different machine every time. Doesn't seem to work now. Is it working? Shall I just speak up? I'll just speak up. Okay. I'm agent for the application. The scheme you have before you will help revitalise this town centre, whilst also supplying much needed housing and accommodation. It thus accords with both central government's wishes and also with OMBC's town centre strategy. It's fully supported by the housing department, who will manage the lettings, and they have a lease ready to sign. The planners have recommended approval. There have been no objections. In summary, oh, that's loud now. In summary, a great number of authorities and public bodies support the scheme. However, it's you, the members of the Planning Committee, who will make the decision. So I've therefore come to this meeting in case you'd like to have any questions answered.
Thank you. Could I ask the officers to give their views on the application?
Yes, well, obviously the details are set out in the report. The only reasons really that this is before members is because it is a major application, because there are 12 units and there is a financial contribution towards some off-site public open space. But other than that, as Mr. Barnes has said, this is bringing back into productive use a quite prominent building in the town centre, and it's obviously recommended for approval as set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry, I did forget to ask if anybody's got any questions of Mr. Barnes. No? Thank you. It's open for discussion. Councillor Hudson.
I'd like to move this, Chairman. I think it's absolutely excellent, and I think it's necessary to bring these buildings back into use, and I think it's essential that we support schemes like this.
Councillor Harkness. There you go, you're freed up now, you can actually speak. Yeah. Yeah. Is there any other comments at all now? Okay, it's been approved and seconded. All those in favour? Right, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
We're in Oldham now at Hudson Street. Have we got a... Sorry?
Nothing to do with me.
No, it's... Yeah, they could have named it after you, John, in retrospect. Have we got a... Have we got any have we got any speaker on this? No? No? Okay, could I ask the officers to outline the application? And it would appear that this is just to release one of the conditions so the development can get ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This application for an office development in Hollingwood, close to the Metrolink stop there. It was before committee in February of this year. Committee resolved to grant approval, subject to conditions and to a legal agreement on a transfer of some land to improve a footway. It's what's termed a hybrid application, so there's a mix of a full application, which is where you get the whole detailed proposal, and an outline where you're establishing the principle and various issues within that, so it might include siting, landscaping and so forth. So it was resolved to grant because it's a hybrid application, in effect there's two in one, and the list of conditions that were produced for the full application and for the outline application were replicated. However, one of those conditions related to works that would need to be carried out in relation to the motorway junction when a certain volume of traffic would be generated by the scheme. And whilst that will occur once the whole of the outline scheme comes forward, the provision for just the first unit on the site wouldn't meet that threshold, and therefore it's been agreed with Transport for Greater Manchester and with my colleague that condition is not necessary now for the single office unit, but would remain as a requirement before the new development on the remainder of the site took place. So that's simply the change to the recommendation and the resolution that committee made. Thank you, Chair.
I think this is an area in a site that we've been looking for development for some time. Has anybody got any comments at all? Councillor Chairman.
I'll second that.
Right. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any other contributions? No? All those in favour? Okay, thank you. Right, the next application we have is Morrison Supermarket, Poplar Street, Failsworth, and it's a variation of conditions. Have we got any? Yes, would you like to?
Chair, you normally let us.
Yeah. If I could ask the office to outline the application, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, to some extent, this is an application that had been before committee previously, and committee had considered that the extension of the servicing hours was needed to be considered in the light of experience, if you like. So a temporary permission was granted early last year for a 12-month period in order to assess the situation. In the meantime, Morrison's have been operating within the extended hours. We'd not received during that period of time any complaints about that activity, nor of our colleagues in environmental health. Nevertheless, as part of this application, you'll see we've had a couple of objections received and a third objection which is referred to on the late list, and those concerns obviously are in relation to potential noise nuisance primarily due to the increased deliveries. So this is the site itself. It's the building, the main store. Access comes from the northerly direction along Poplar Street, which is a residential street, but the service yard is at the back of the site alongside the canal. So that's just showing you the service yard. So again, clearly not immediately adjacent to existing properties and with some distance away from the properties on the other side of the canal. This is showing you as you approach. So the Morrison store's on the left-hand side. There's a care home on the right-hand side, but as you can see, this is set back from the main carriageway itself, and the service yard is much further along behind this social club building there. So again, that's just to show that there's no direct relationship. This is Poplar Street itself. Obviously this is where existing houses do front onto the street, but even if vehicles arrive earlier than they're allowed in, you can see from the previous view, this particular area, they go past these houses. So there is traffic that will traverse the street, and obviously there will be some noise generated by that, but the vehicles, when they start to pull up to come into the site, and then obviously the loading itself is away from the residential area, which is at, say, this part. So that's the view that you saw previously, and the service yard round the back. Given the information that we've had, the noise assessment that was previously submitted, the limited number of objections that we've received, and we did consult with, I think it was 190 neighbouring properties, so you know we looked to make sure that everybody was given that opportunity, and given the low level of response to that, it is considered that a permanent permission for the change should now be granted. Thank you, Chair.
Is it Mr. Glennon? If you will contribute, please. 3 minutes, please.
I'll keep it short and sweet, Chair. Your officers have pointed out where we are. The application's before you. It's for a permanent consent following the trial period of 12 months. As your officers pointed out, there's been no complaints during this period. No point repeating anything else, Chair. I'll answer any questions members may have.
Has anybody got any questions? Any observations? Right, thank you very much. And is there anybody got any comments on the application? Yes, Councillor.
Cheers. Obviously we've had the complaint, sorry, not the complaints, the letters of objection. Do we know whereabouts they're from? Are they from people living on Poplar Street? And is there any further detail about what it is that specifically they've objected about? So what their specific issue is with the thing, whether that is that. Cheers.
Yeah, the three objections. Two of the residents are off Poplar Street, numbers 12 and 25, and the third resident lives in Earl's Lodge, which is the facility that I indicated earlier on the drawing. So they are all people, if you like, who face onto the access road. But again, as you saw, there are a lot more properties on there which would be equally affected. The concerns are essentially about the noise of the vehicles passing along Poplar Street, and in particular, if those vehicles, as I said earlier, arrive a little bit earlier, they will wait outside the site itself until obviously they're allowed into the facility. There's also a comment that somebody said that it isn't needed for them to do that, but quite clearly the applicants have indicated it is a necessary requirement for them to make sure the store is well stocked for opening, and they wouldn't of course do that if it wasn't in the commercial interest to do that. So really that it's the vehicles going past rather than the actual activity itself that is the cause of concern.
Councillor Rightness.
Well, to be honest, I think George just asked pretty much what I was going to ask. The only other thing I was going to mention is on the let list you said the complaint said that there will be increased disturbances. Well, this has had a trial period, so there would have been issues. So, you know, I think they were looking at it as, by the sounds of that, it looks as if they're looking at it as if this is a new change. But, you know, I said, oh well, there will be change, there will be disturbances. Well, if there hasn't been, does that make sense?
I think it does make sense. As I said, that's one of the reasons why we did such a wide consultation on the application, because we wanted to know. It may well be that many people don't actually realise. You know, it depends how light your sleep is to some extent, and there is commercial activity in the nearby area as well. So people are used to traffic passing by in those instances.
So I was just wondering quickly about people are complaining about them turning up early. Is that a case that they're idling, and so the vehicles are just sort of making a noise from that? And if that's so, is there any way we could ask Morrison's to tell their drivers not to do that, both in terms of the residents' amenity and also the environmental impact they will have?
We can certainly remind them of their obligations in terms of this activity. Obviously the drivers, I think, actually tend to be their drivers. It's the main ones are their own vehicles, so they do have that control. It's a little bit more difficult sometimes if you've got third party contractor vehicles arriving. So certainly as part of the decision notice, we can give them a covering note or an informative that makes it clear that they should look into those issues. It has to be said, obviously, other noise nuisance issues are covered, as we say, regularly by other legislation as well.
Well, I went down today to check it because I'm one of the people that Graham was saying is light sleeping at the moment. I've got plenty of time. And I went down and I checked with as many people as I could, and there didn't seem to be any big issues with it. The fact is, Morrison's are there, and I don't think anything will 100% move the noise away. So I think we've got to be sensible and say, have they done everything they can? I think they have. And I looked at it, and I don't think, as you say, the yard is quite a long way from the residential properties, and I think it's as reasonable as you'll get, and so I'll move it, Chairman.
I'll second that. That's all I was going to say. Thank you.
So it's been moved and seconded. Has anybody got any further comments? If not, all those in favour of approval, please. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. We then move on to item 12, which is Chew Valley Road, Greenfield. Are you speaking again, Mr. Glenn?
Only to say I'll move it, Chairman.
Well, let's go through the process, Mr. Glenn. If I could ask the officers to outline the application and the nature of it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a site, currently vacant site, but one which outline planning permission previously been granted for. So this is the details of the scheme, proposal for 10 dwellings on the site. Most of the issues obviously are set out in the report, and again we respond to any queries members have. This is the site boundary itself. Technology's doing for me here. Where have we gone? There we go. Ooh, wrong way. Right. So this is the layout of the development, the types of houses that are being proposed on the site, and just giving you a visual of the street scene in the local area. So this backs onto a car park. There's a car park rather at the back of the site itself, which obviously was behind the screen fencing. Again, other visuals of that. The properties in the area. And again, back to the site boundary. Members will note that there's been a change to some of the plan references. It mentions that issues to do with the access would be reported back to members. We can confirm that those details have now been agreed and the relevant plan added to the application, and some of the other plan references will be slightly amended, but the details themselves will remain the same. So again, as set out in the report, recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Glennon.
I'll keep it short and sweet again, Chair. As the officers have pointed out, this is a full application for 10 houses. Committee have previously approved the principles of residential development in October 2017. It's currently a cleared site. It's a brownfield site in a sustainable location, and it provides a mix of house types, providing 10 houses. It's recommended for approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions members may or may not have.
Is there any questions of Mr. Glennon? Yes, Councillor.
So one of the concerns I have with this is, whilst it's brilliant that brownfield sites are being used, because that's what we all want, I think the issue is with plots 1 and 2 and the space. I don't know if you could go into sort of if there's any way that it could be re-looked at to increase the size of the rooms to meet the national standards.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of put it into context, the shortfall is 4 square metres per dwelling. So that is a shortfall, and as the officers point out within their report, it is minor in the grand scheme of things. We've looked at a number of different ways in which we can sort of try and bring that 4 square metres on board to meet those technical standards. One of the ways we could do that is to push the rear of the dwelling out, but what that then has the impact on is reducing the amenity space to the rear of the property. The other option we've looked at is whether or not we can bring the buildings up and have a 3rd floor. And that isn't feasible because of the context and the way that the buildings are sort of laid out and the overall character of the area. So whilst, yes, it is a shortfall, it's considered that 4 square metres in the grand scheme over a 2-bedroom house isn't sufficient enough reason in our view to warrant a refusal, and the options to bring that 4 square metres in would cause greater problems and would detract from the character of the scheme.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think following on from that, I think having a balance between obviously the size of the houses and the cramping of the site you know, and I think this is a lot less cramped than a previous application that John and I objected to near there, where they were cramming loads of houses in a small area, and it just really wasn't suitable. And I think this is, you know, there's plenty of open space. It's not cramped at all, and you know, I think it's you know, we're using a brownfield site, and I think it's you know, we do need more houses in Saddleworth, and this is the sort of sites we should be building on. So I'll second John's. Did you actually?
Well, we're still on questions to Mr.
Yeah,
Glennon.
so, all right, okay.
There is no further
I'll leave that.
questions
Fair
for
enough,
Mr.
all right.
Glennon. Thank you very much, Mr. Glenn. If we can move back to Councillor Hudson, who's moved it.
Well, I'll move it, Chairman.
Second it. Right, Councillor. Well, that's fine. It's not been approved yet. Councillor Robert.
Just a quick question about the TPO trees to the north of the site, or not the north of the site, sorry, the south of the site. Plans upside down. I'm just wondering, are the routes and things going to be okay in terms of the development? Is there going to be any impact on them, or will they be? Is that being considered? Will that be okay?
Yeah, the assessment in relation to the trees has formed part of the considerations of the application. And as you can see, for condition 7, it covers that element of it. So obviously once they commence work, it is again their responsibility to ensure that the measures are put in place to protect any roots of trees that do come into the site.
Are you all right with the councillor? I've got your name right now. It's been moved and seconded approval. Is everybody in agreement? Or whoever's in agreement, please put their hand up. Right, that's unanimous. That brings us on to the last item on the agenda, which is a report on appeals. I think you'll find there's 2 appeals there that have both been dismissed. I don't know whether anybody's got any comments or questions. Do you agree with the report? Right, thank you. And incredibly enough, that's the end of the meeting.
Dismissed us to appeals and I was, don't I?